The second part of Chapter 2 will focus specifically on a few different types of research methodology that can be used to study learning. As a review, in the last video we talked about the 7 different ways we can assess change in behavior. However, we need more than that in order to be able to truly understand how the learning process works. We need a trustworthy way of obtaining data that is accurate, consistent, and can help us avoid any biases or validity problems. The first approach we have to obtaining data to study learning are anecdotes, or just generic stories, first-hand or second-hand reports of personal experience. For example, I could ask you to tell me about your first day of second grade or your first day of sixth grade. You could tell me that story, and I could potentially learn some things about what it's like to be a sixth grader. Using anecdotes is a very simple approach. It's easy to do and it gets us a lot of information. However, it is not reliable. It's less specific, it's less reliable, and tends to rely on casual observation. So just getting someone's firsthand account, a story, their experience is not actually enough to help us get reliable data. Consider this question. How did you feel during your first day of middle school? Take a second and think about that. And then consider this. Say I'm doing a study looking at socio-emotional maturity in rising sixth graders. That means I'm interested in what their social abilities are, how emotionally stable they are, and things like that. If you were to tell me the story about how you felt going into middle school, what would I learn from it? But what are the downsides of that information? Yes, I can get some interesting facts from you or from a wider variety of people, but there are a lot of downsides to it. There's not going to be consistency. I can't prompt you to tell me specific aspects of it. It's only your experience. It's very biased. So we can't rely on anecdotal evidence. Our next option is to do a case study. A case study is similar to anecdotes in that it focuses specifically on one person, but it takes a much deeper dive into their life. It examines one or sometimes 2 or 3 people in great detail. Case studies can go a long way towards helping us understand abnormal behavior because of how much information we can get from them. For example, this is HM. HM is a man who suffered brain trauma after which he had a lot of memory problems. Researchers then followed HM, learned as much as they could about his life before and after his accident, and learned a lot about memory and brain trauma. While this is amazing information and does teach us a lot, it takes a whole lot of time and resources, and we can't assume that what happened to HM would happen the same way to someone else, even if they had the exact same brain injury. We can't generalize. So if someone tells you, I had this experience, this is what I got from it, that's great for them and can teach us about them, but that does not mean everyone else has the same experience, or in terms of learning, the same cause and effect. In fact, when doing a case study or an anecdotal examination, we can never assume cause and effect. We do not know, for example, that HM's brain trauma is what caused his memory to have trouble. There's a lot of evidence that points that it does, but without doing an experiment, we cannot know that for sure. Case studies also rely on self-report, meaning that the person you're studying tells you what they want you to know, and self-report can be extremely biased. Another methodology that uses self-report is a descriptive study. Think about taking a survey online or in the research lab. A lot of the time, surveys and things like that rely on descriptive information, so interviews and questionnaires. Descriptive studies can be very good in that they allow us to gather a lot of data from multiple cases. For example, in the last study I ran, I believe I collected information the last survey I did from over 400 people. We can do a lot of statistical analyses with this information that helps us reduce risk of false conclusions or biased interpretations and things like that. So statistics actually allow us to do a lot with descriptive studies. Because they look at so many people, we're able to generalize them more and say, hey, this is kind of what's happening to people on average. However, we can once again not test cause and effect with descriptive studies. Without having changed something or manipulated something to see what the outcome is, we can never assume cause and effect. Descriptive studies also rely on self-report, which has biases associated with that, just like case studies. For example, if I was to ask you to complete a survey that looked at drinking behaviors in college students, and I asked you, how often do you drink? And you're under 21. Are you going to be honest? Some people would, some people would not. So there is potential bias there as well. Then we have experiments, and experiments are the gold standard in the field. Whenever possible, we want to conduct an experiment. That gives us the best data and the best understanding of what's happening. An experiment is characterized by manipulating or doing something to one or more variables and measuring the outcome. Think about a medical trial. Medical trials are a classic example of an experiment. Patients come in, some of the patients get to test a new medicine, some of them don't, and then you look to see whether the people who got the medicine get better. That's a manipulation. Because something was manipulated, we can learn cause and effect. We know for sure that doing this thing, maybe not necessarily for sure, but with a much higher degree of certainty, that manipulation is what caused that behavior. In an experiment, we have two important variables that we want to pay attention to. And when we're learning about research, as we go through this semester, I want you to pay attention to these two variables. The independent variable is that new medicine I just gave in my example, the variable that's manipulated. So if you're involved in a medical trial, you come in, you get a medicine, or you don't get medicine. That's the independent variable. The dependent variable is that outcome, the change that either happened or didn't happen, that thing that you're interested in measuring after, or the effect. So you can think about the independent variable as the cause and the dependent variable as the effect. To give you a more psychological example, say you're doing a study that looks at whether having a sibling impacts friendship quality. We can't manipulate this, because we cannot randomly assign people to have a sibling or not. We can't do anything about that. We can't be like, parents, you go and have another baby so that we can study your older child, and so on and so forth. So that's not an experiment. Another psychological example of something that is an experiment. Say I'm interested in the impact watching television shows that have a diverse cast have on people's prejudices and biases. I can have people come in and I can make half of my people watch a show that features many powerful African American and Hispanic American characters, and then afterwards measure their attitudes towards those two ethnic groups, or racial groups, excuse me. That is a manipulation. In that example, my independent variable is which show they watched. My dependent variable is their attitudes towards those racial groups. Diving a little bit deeper into an experiment, there's actually two main types that we use frequently in the field, between and within subject design. And the difference between these two just happens in terms of who is getting what manipulations. In a between subjects design, you have two or more groups of participants that get different things. So in the example I just gave, one of my groups watched television shows that featured a racially diverse cast. The other group didn't. That allows me to see whether or not the television show is actually what changed attitudes. So two or more groups that are treated differently. The independent variable is made to differ across these groups. In a medical trial, you have one group who gets the medicine and another group that often gets a placebo. That's a between subject effects. You're looking to see whether the cause and effect is different between the two subject groups. One more example, exposing one group to aggression, producing experiences to see if it increases aggression, and the other group is not exposed to aggression-producing experiences. When we're doing a between-subject study, we know that the differences in behavior of participants are the result of the differences in the independent variable. The other option is a within-subject experiment. And with this, a specific participant's behavior is observed before and after a manipulation. So rather than having one group get one manipulation and one group get another, each person in the study gets both. For example, you look to see, say we're testing a pill that looks at blood pressure. You measure everyone's blood pressure before taking a pill. You give them the pill, you measure everyone's blood pressure after, and then you look to see on average if that medication improved their blood pressure. In this situation, the difference in the dependent variable, remember that affect that outcome, are assumed to be the result of differences in experiences at different times. If you have any questions about within subject and between subject experiments, or any other type of research methodology, there's some great information in your textbook. Please make sure you're reading your chapters. It's going to be very important for your success in this class. But if you check that out and still have questions, feel free to email me, call me, or schedule a Zoom office hour meeting with me. I'd be happy to go over it in more detail with you.